So Father Paul Presbytera, Angela and George Georgalis, George Pappas, and the mighty 100 that made it here today. It's my honor to be here to share my thoughts on stewardship. Every time I walk through the front doors of this church and light a candle in the narthex and enter the nave, I have this very powerful sense of belonging, sometimes deja vu. It's like being home. And as Father said, my physical home has been hundreds of miles away in New Jersey. And in fact, Raleigh has not been my home since 1957, when our parents, Lou and Elaine and my sister Maria, left to go where our father's work took us. So you might ask, why this strong pull of belonging? Well, it's about being linked to an extraordinary, nearly 100-year-old history of this church and community, and what we know of our parents' lives, who were profoundly touched by being part of it. This stirs a desire to support its longevity and to be a part, paying it forward. If you go to the church website and look up parish history, it makes reference to the church beginnings in 1924 in the vicinity of Salisbury and Blount Street in downtown Raleigh. Our grandfather was there, Gus Vernax, one of the church founders. He came to the United States in 1893 at the ripe young age of 19, made his way to Chicago, Roanoke, and then to Raleigh around 1900. Now, can you imagine what Raleigh was like 120 years ago? He was grandfather to several parishioners of this church, Manny Aretakis, my cousin Roxanne Vallis-Serlitas, Peter Bogathis, Noel Roussos Harrison, Dina Aretakis Horn, and more. I never met him. He died too soon in 1939. It was the same year that my mother, her sister Bina, and my grandmother came to Greece to join their 3 sisters and 2 brothers that were already here. Gus lived long enough to see the beginning of the church that was erected downtown on Person Street. I'm going to digress for just a moment to say a few words about the 5 Vernax sisters, Porta, Angeline, Marion, Bina, my mother Elaine, and our grandmother Harriet. I find it impossible to imagine there could be another 6 women like this in one family. They were all 5'0", tough, real tough, smart, entrepreneurial, talented, dedicated, mothers, yayas, and grand-yayas, all of them role models. They were all devoted to the church and all an integral part of the rich history and formative character of this community. It is during, to continue the story, my parents were married in the Person Street Church in 1951. I was baptized there in 1954, my sister Maria in 55, and I said earlier we left Raleigh. In 1978, they returned to Raleigh, in 1978 with my sister Michelle, and it's during this time that the church here on Lead Mine Road was in its final stages of completion on land contributed by the Vallis family. For the next 35 years, until my mother passed in 2013, this church was a centerpiece of their lives. They loved the church. They loved the people. They loved the connection to something that brought deep personal meaning to their lives. My father took a competitive pride in the church. There were a couple of things in particular he liked to boast about. First was the Greek festival. He would say that this was no normal Greek festival. This was not a few tents out in the parking lot selling candle mathas and playing scratchy Greek music on a tape recorder. This was a master production. The food, he would say, was more authentic than if it was made in a Greek chorion, a village. The salads were handcrafted with fresh tomatoes and perfectly brined feta. As a former Marine, he approached his participation in this like it was a military mission. One year, I went to see for myself. Hundreds upon hundreds of people, acres of activity. I have been to Greek festivals in New York, New Jersey, Chicago, and elsewhere. I asked myself, how could a community of 350 people do something that dwarfs what others do? Well, the community, as the expression goes, fights above its weight class. What this community does as one is testimony to your resolve and love for the church. You've done it year in and year out for many years. The festival is emblematic of the greatness of what you have here. The second thing that Lou was proud about, my sister Michelle reminded me of, he was proud about members joining the church who were not of Greek ancestry or of the Greek faith. Lou would insist that these families join because they love the people, they love the church beliefs, this community. He would make it a point to introduce himself. So I wondered, why is it that this was so important to him? And then it occurred to me, his mother was not Greek. She was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. She was an Afrikaner of Dutch descent. She fell in love, married our Greek grandfather, and then she was immediately disowned by her parents. In fact, they gave their 17-year-old daughter a letter, a copy of which I have framed, and it said in Afrikaans, "You are no longer born to us." His mother adopted the Orthodox religion, learned Greek, and upon coming to this country from Greece, Lou was born and his father died within 5 years. So his mother continued to raise 5 boys and 2 girls in the Greek Orthodox faith. He insisted my father learn Greek, and he learned it so well that in his second tour of duty coming out of World War II, he served as an interpreter to the American forces interfacing with the Greek army. So after all these years, I understand that his embracing these new families in this church had to do with his memory of his mother's adoption of the church. Today, a hallmark of the Holy Trinity is how you've embraced all families, fostering a rich contemporary diversity that's important to the sustenance of the Greek church in America. Our mother's relationship with the church went into overdrive the day they moved to a smaller home about 200 yards from the back of the church property. My father put a gate in the back fence, and my mother had unfettered walking access to the church. After my father passed in 2007, my sisters and I started making more phone calls and visits to Raleigh to ensure she was doing okay. I would reach her on the phone after several unsuccessful attempts, and I'd say, "Hey, where were you?" And so many times the answer would be, "I was in the kitchen doing this or doing that," no doubt holding court with her girlfriends, preparing for some event. Community of friends, a community of love, as she saw it. Or another time I'd call and ask, "Where were you?" And she said, "I was at the church pulling weeds." Incredulously, I responded, don't they have the custodian or a service to do that? And then there would come one of her favorite Greek words among many, kokomiri, or kaimeno. Sort of loosely translated, it means poor thing, a sentiment of empathy for others. Then I remember the custodian passed away suddenly. Elaine was heartbroken, and she called me up and said, "Can we please take some money from her account to help pay the funeral expenses?" I said, "Of course, Mom." To her, he was part of the community, as she so inclusively defined it. And then there were the young people of this church. One day I noticed this container of bottle caps on the counter in her kitchen, and I asked if she was recycling these, and she said, "No, they're for a young man at the church who's collecting bottle caps." I have no idea how she made this connection or where it registered on her importance meter, but judging by the number of caps she had collected, it was really important. When my father passed, I suggested we do a scholarship in his name for a scholarship Sunday. She thought it was a good idea, but she worried it would call attention to herself, and she didn't like that. She had an expression that I won't pretend to mimic in her Greek accent, but she said, "I don't like to play the big shot." I said, "Well, forget that. You can be a small shot. This is a good idea." So we've been part of Scholarship Sunday for nearly a decade. I can only sum up this experience in one word: awestruck. Each year the student group seems to get bigger and more awesome. Make no mistake, what you see in the youth of this church and what they assimilate being part of this church and community, they can never find in the best of public or private schools. The experiences like serving the altar, Goya, St. John the Merciful, Hellenic dance, the retreats, religious education, Greek school, the many charitable drives, feeling the love and nurturing of this church community, well, over time, this seeps deep into their character. It helps make them better citizens of this church and better citizens of this country. I'm going to close with one last story that poignantly sums up what I wanted to share today. About a month before Elaine passed from her fast-moving cancer, my daughter brought my recently born granddaughter, Mackenzie Elaine, to visit her namesake. We pulled out the iPhone to take a video, and we asked Elaine, "Mom, you want to say a few words that we can save for Mackenzie?" And she said without hesitation in her faint but resolute voice, "Love your mother and father and the church." For sure, she meant the church with a capital C. As Father Paul said in his eulogy of Elaine, the church as the mother on earth. At the same time, we knew her deeply embedded feelings of love for this church and its place in our family's history. My sisters, if they were here, would agree with me that it is only by the grace of God we were born to extraordinary, loving parents and into a history of people who believed in something greater than themselves, this church, Holy Trinity, and the community. So this is my motivation for being part of stewardship, to help preserve what my grandfather began, what my parents loved so much, and what is exceptional about this community, so that it can continue to thrive into its next century. Now you know why I have this feeling of belonging here and why I passionately join you to be a steward of Holy Trinity today, 2020, and into its enduring future. God bless this church, its excellent leadership, and this community. Thank you very much.